Hey everyone, thanks for joining and thanks for joining us today, Lori. We're really excited to speak with you and learn a little bit more about how some of our customers can break into the government contract space. I mean, Perry,
Thanks,
you can
Bryan.
yeah, we're really looking forward to it. We saw some background on your company, Cadra, and congratulations on 10 years. That
Thank
is
you.
incredible. What have you kind of seen over the past 10 years? Like, what got you into the space, and how much has it changed over the last 10 years?
It's changed a lot, I will say, especially over the last 10 years, and even over the last couple of years with AI now coming out. But I've started Cadra, like you said, about 10 years ago because I was looking to help small to medium sized businesses actually figure out what compliance looked like. I worked a lot, as you mentioned, in the governmental space. Prior to that, I did a lot of external consulting, but really wanted to help, like I said, those small to medium sized businesses because they didn't have the expertise and or the manpower to kind of figure out what needed to be in place in order to win new contracts or, win new customers, anything like that. So that's why I started it. And yes, it's changed a lot over the last 10 years. It's gone a lot from kind of more of a manual process. Things are starting to automate a little bit more. And we're starting to see a lot more formalization the compliance frameworks, especially for those that are looking to get into the governmental space.
Lori, question for you. What is it that you think draws the majority of the folks you work with and even yourself into the government space? It's kind of known to be so scary with all the paperwork at the very beginning, right? So it's a daunting approach. So what do you usually see is the impetus for folks to start taking on that big challenge of figuring out how to make their way through all the paperwork and questions and everything else that goes with it?
Yes, that's a great question because it's no joke trying to get into the governmental space. There's so many frameworks and so many acronyms and, hard to figure out. I think the main thing is a lot of customers want to get in it because once they're in, they're usually in for a while. They have a pretty good standard process. They make those good relationships and it's a customer that they can rely on year over year. And then obviously a lot more definite different RFPs just for those governmental clients as well.
Yeah. One more for you. This just kind of falls on, any big difference that you see between folks that are trying to go at the state or municipal level versus at the federal level? They both have their complexities, but obviously the federal government's got some advantages on that side. And then sometimes it can be an easier entry to start working with smaller municipalities. What's your experience been?
It honestly depends. I know that's like the worst answer ever, but it depends on kind of where they're trying to go within the governmental space versus state versus federal. If the client is in the cloud and they're trying to sell to a federal agency, they're going to have to go through FedRAMP, which is a huge process. A lot of your customers are probably familiar with that. If they're trying to sell at a state agency or smaller municipality and they're in the cloud as well, they get to go through GovRAMP, which is, I would say, a lot less intense. And they also have some easier paths to a quicker way to be GovRAMP certified. Like they can have a fast start through SOC 2. So if they're already doing SOC 2s for their commercial business and they're going to start selling that same business to the government, state agencies, then they're going to have a faster track to get there with that SOC 2 on the state municipal level versus the federal level.
Okay, just one other last quick thing. So for the folks that don't know what FedRAMP is, could you, because I think once you get into the space, you start learning these acronyms just pile on, right? But there's a whole different language of vocabulary. So FedRAMP, for those that are non-practitioners, what's the easiest way you usually explain it to people?
Yeah, it comes down to if your product or service is in the cloud and you are selling to a federal agency, that federal agency wants to use your product in the cloud, you have to become what's called FedRAMP certified. And that is a whole process in itself. Like I won't get into it, but it's a very time intensive process that, it does take a lot of people. I will say they are making a lot of changes to the process where hopefully it's going to be a lot more automated and a lot easier. But in a nutshell, that's what it is. If you're in the cloud looking to sell to a federal agency, you have to go through the process. Similar to GovRAMP, that's more on the state side. So if you're looking, you're in the cloud, you're looking to sell to a state. A lot of the states are participating in that GovRAMP, as well as local municipalities, local governments as well. Some school systems are that. So you have to kind of look at who you're selling to, where your product is, to figure out what you need to be certified. And just for your audience too, like that's outside of the DoD. Like if you're looking to sell to the DoD, there's a whole nother framework called the Cybersecurity Maturation Model Certification, CMMC. For those who haven't heard about it, it's a huge thing right now in the DoD and a lot of those spaces.
So with all that being said, Lori, like where do you recommend somebody like...
It's a lot. It's a lot. I'm sorry.
We've got so many customers that are familiar with the private space, but with the economy, frankly, the way that it is, right, they're looking for opportunities anywhere they could get them. And a lot of the times I'll look towards the government, municipalities to try to find those opportunities. But like, where do you think the first place to start would be? Would it be trying to get ready for the compliance aspect? Would it, like, where would you even start?
It's a good question. I definitely recommend starting with some sort of compliance framework. If they're not sure on where they're going to go from a government level, are they going to go DoD? Are they going to go federal agency? Are they going to go state agency? There are basic frameworks put out by NIST, which is the National Institute of Standard Technology. So it's a very well-known government agency, basically, or sub-agency that provides these standards that, again, are used by the government, are used by these federal agencies and stuff. So one of the best basic frameworks is the risk management framework, or RMF. There's also a cybersecurity framework, or CSF. Government loves their acronyms, but those are some of the good basic ones to at least start with. So you have a compliance framework to start. And then from there, you can kind of figure out, okay, which agency am I going to go to? If you're going to go to federal outside of DoD or the state outside of the DoD, there is a NIST framework that they're both based off of, which is the NIST 853. I'll get that right. And that's a huge one. Definitely kind of start working our way there. It's not like an overnight path. And then the CMMC, if you're selling to the government, that also has a NIST framework to it. That's the 800-171. That's a little bit smaller. Again, it depends on kind of where you're trying to go, but I would definitely start off with one of the basic frameworks. And I know I just threw a lot more acronyms out there, so I apologize.
It seems like part of the thing would be, I think at some point, do you suggest people sit down and kind of get a brief overview of the frameworks themselves before they get started, start learning some of the vocabulary? I've got to imagine that sometimes as you're going into one of the frameworks, it'll make reference to other frameworks and it do that by acronyms, assuming some level of knowledge and awareness. So is there like that was a great tip for getting started. Is there a place where you tend to send people to say, okay, like when you want to take your first baby steps, here's the place to start learning how to speak our language and understand all of the different things that are going on?
A great question again. Yes. You can go out to the NIST website itself, but I think that gets a little overwhelming. There are other sites out there, just to put a plug in for Cadras, but we try to take that. One of our taglines is really just trying to help demystify and make all these federal talk more plain English for people. So we have a lot of great blog posts out there that kind of explain the differences between these different frameworks there. But outside of that, LinkedIn is also a great place to kind of learn a little bit about what each of these different frameworks are, because there's a lot of great blog posts and articles put out there by experts in the industry. But outside of that, I can't think of just like one kind of place people go outside of like maybe downloading one of the NIST frameworks, and it has an appendix of all the acronyms and everything like that.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking you might mention Cadra's website because I found it incredibly informative. It seems like it was written in a much more friendly manner than some of the federal government websites that I've looked at in advance. So
thank you. Yes, that's our goal. Because thank you. As you see, this is not easy, so we try to uncomplicate it as much as possible. That also helps my mind. I'm trying not to make things complicated for people.
So, Lori, can you talk about once they get through, that initial work, like say they work with Cadra, they get through getting some of the approvals for some of these compliance measures, like, do those apply to multiple government departments? Like, say working with Cadra up front and getting invested in being able to be an approved vendor and having the security and compliance required, like, what would you say that would do as far as opening the opportunities to multiple business opportunities and growth in the future?
Yeah, definitely. So, especially if people are trying to go for the FedRAMP, I would say that is the most strenuous, but that also is the one that opens the most doors, because if you are FedRAMP authorized, you can also typically take that and become GovRAMP authorized as well, but you can't get GovRAMP and then go FedRAMP. So that's why we say, if you think you're going to work with federal agencies, try to start with the federal side, and then you can use that for state agencies as well. And then, as well as even like commercials and people working with the DoD, they're required to use a verified platform or cloud product. And that's usually a FedRAMP. So FedRAMP products have to use other FedRAMP vetted products. So you're not only opening the door to working with federal agencies, but you're also opening the door to working with other people that are selling to those federal agencies. So there's going to be leverage on both the federal side, but also to other, like I said, other products that are leveraging FedRAMP as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I feel like getting that gets you in the door. And then once you're in the door, you have so many opportunities, both horizontally and vertically, to sell. So
definitely.
Bryan, on that side, let me quickly kind of add one follow on to it. There's, like, of late, right, we've had a lot of folks that I've talked to have actually said, gosh, it used to be that I felt like this was just such a steady business, and that it was kind of an easy to know, once you got the contract, how much work, and there are very few circumstances in which the government would back out of contracts. And then obviously a lot of people have seen in the news that things have been turbulent. But then when I've spoken to people that are working inside of the government contracting space, the thing that I've heard back from them typically is, well, there's some, there's been a little bit of upheaval, but actually, we actually feel like it's been a lot steadier than the news makes it out. Different points of view, I think, coming from all different directions. What have you been seeing on your side?
I've seen a little bit of both, to be honest. And like I said, if you're in, you're in. I know there have been a lot of budget cuts over the last couple of years. So that has narrowed it down a little bit. But I'd say the big thing, at least from my side, is FedRAMP is changing a lot. They're changing their program. They're changing how you can actually get into the program. And they're trying to make it easier. So I think a lot of people have also kind of been holding off to see, hey, how's this going to change? How's this going to affect me? Prior to these changes, you actually had to have a federal agency that was going to sponsor you through the process. And that really made it hard because a lot of federal agencies weren't necessarily wanting to sponsor a product unless they were going to use that product. But now they're changing it where, number one, is more automated. But the main thing is you don't have to have a federal agency sponsor anymore, which is going to open the doors for a lot more organizations to be able to become that FedRAMP certified and then sell to federal agencies.
It's helpful to know. Yeah, it's. I've heard that, like, with some of the spaces where, if it was a National Institutes of Health, right, it's been a little bit on the tougher side. Obviously, on the DOW side, there's been an increase in spending, and then just government's need for additional AI has driven enormous amount of spending on the infrastructure side for data centers and the like. But it's really helpful to hear your advice and guidance. One more thing I'm going to throw in there, Bryan, hopefully this isn't steal a question you're going to ask, but I think we're both thinking about it. When's the best time for people to come to work with you?
I'd say as early as possible, because there are a lot of caveats like we had talked about. We want to make sure that you're picking the right framework and knowing based on where you're trying to go. And then from there, we can help you with a gap assessment, a readiness assessment to actually see where you already stand, because we don't want you adding controls or adding complexity to the organization that you might not need to be. It's already a tough enough process. So we definitely recommend people come as early as possible, because we can help make that whole process easier for them.
So as early as possible. And okay. Yeah. It's got to be a big help too. So
Yes. And that's our goal, to make it, like I said, easy, as transitionable as it is as possible for them.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I was just curious, Lori, like, how does, like, once you get approved, right? Like, what does the process look like for staying approved? Like, it seems like you're getting, it's not just upfront. There's more involved. And what does that look like?
Yes. Getting approved is the hardest part, I will say, but as you mentioned, you have to stay approved. So that includes what at least FedRAMP, GovRAMP calls continuous monitoring. So there is a monthly process where you have to upload some of your documentation. You have to upload your latest vulnerability scans. You have to update your latest plan of action and milestones, which is tracking all your identified risks and stuff like that, and some other things. So it's something that has to be done on a monthly basis. In addition, you have to go through a assessment at least annually by your independent third-party auditor. The first one's always the hardest because that's the full control set. But after that, then they do a smaller subset. So rotating 3 years to test all of the controls. Again, it's not something that it's one and done. It's something that you have to stay on top of. You either have to have a person, usually internally, to actually be managing everything. It's not something that is typically somebody else's second or third hat to wear. It's typically one person staying on it within the company, or, it can be outsourced to somebody as well.
How much of that is able to be automated these days? I know that at the end of the day, there's a lot of judgment calls that need to be made. There's decisions that need to be made, but I'm thinking back, and it's been a little while since I've been in one of these full audit situations, but we're talking about hundreds and sometimes thousands of items, right? Where there's standards and how your business is meeting those standards, and information that's collected to support showing how you've met the standards. So I mean, it seems like it's still a very onerous task from an organizational standpoint, from an information standpoint, from an information management standpoint. Is that right?
It is. And the good news is it's becoming more automated, and FedRAMP's trying to help with the automation process. If organization is going to try to go for the new FedRAMP, which is called FedRAMP 20X, a lot of that is automation already built in, but that means the organization's got to build in that automation.
Okay.
Everything that they output has to be machine readable, so that whoever's auditing them, they could run it through an automated process to review the evidence. So again, it's a lot of upfront configuration and making sure that you can get the output. Previous FedRAMP people or organizations, there's still some things you can get automated, like you can automatically pull some of your access review logs, or do some of the access review automated. But it's still a lot of, like you said, it's still a lot of manual process. It's a lot of screenshots, not only collecting ahead of time for the auditors to review, but also time intensive sitting with the auditors when they are going through their interviews, and re-showing them and being like, hey, this is exactly how I pulled this piece of evidence that you looked at. Time intensive, definitely. Not for the faint of heart.
And even for the auditors as well, right? It's we keep on hearing about potential technology that's going to help them, but at the end of the day, except for those places where, to your point, it's machine readable context, it's still somebody sitting down and looking at your business, and looking at the controls, and looking at the evidence you've provided, and making record keeping decisions on it, and then a final conclusion and report.
Exactly. Within the NIST framework for the auditors, they have specific things that they have to do for each of the controls. So it calls out whether that control has to be an interview control, whether it has to be a test control, it has to be an examined. So the auditors, they have to follow those processes in order to make sure that your package is actually good enough to be passed. So it's a lot of time, like you said, both on the corporation side, because they're having to sit there and talk to the auditor, but also for the auditor to go through and be like, hey, is this right? Like, let's relook at this, and spend some time, going through all that. FedRAMP moderate, which most people have, has about 325, 350 controls. And a lot of those have subcontrols. So like you said earlier, it could be thousands of pieces of evidence by the time it's all said and done to meet all of those controls.
How do you usually guide people towards managing all of the information itself? Is there a particular Is there a particular process or approach that you typically recommend that helps people to keep the information organized and to make it to where it's easier to carry out those parts of the activities?
It depends on the organization. There are some tools that we sometimes recommend that helps kind of centralize all that. And, there are reminders and stuff, that say, hey, remember to get this piece of evidence. I've seen people actually have like a whole Jira board for it where they have all the controls laid out and then they have the evidence linked within Jira. And then they have each of the things assigned to different people again with those. But again, that takes time to set up. It's really around just organizing it in a manner and having some sort of process to, like I said, remind people to collect that evidence, because not everything has to be collected right when the auditor's there. Some of it has to be done monthly. Some things have to be done quarterly. Some things have to be done, more frequently than that. So it's really about setting up those processes and knowing who's responsible for what and when the next time that task has to be done, so you're not missing it. Because if you miss it, that's going to be an issue when the auditor comes.
And you need a way to prove, right, that it's been done over the course of time, right? Like you need timestamps, et cetera. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And we tell a lot of people, because we know everything else is so expensive to go through. Like a lot of that can be done manually, internally with, spreadsheets and, Word, SharePoint, those types of things. But again, you have to kind of set up that process if you don't have the extra money to buy like a GRC tool, or you don't have internal Jira knowledge to build up some sort of plan like that.
Yeah, go for it, Bryan.
So a lot of our customers use Rocket Docs for just that. So they actually, have content libraries and workflows, et cetera, to sort of one, track and make that auditable, but two, prove that certain things have happened at certain times. It also helps with delegating some of those tasks. So yeah, it's a natural jump because a lot of the people that we work with already have these libraries and they're looking for ways to utilize those workflows and information to be able to qualify for more government contracts and bids.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think that's such a huge point there, because when things are manual like that, it's hard to prove with certainty that those actually happened. There's no, real timestamp or anything that's doing that. So, and it's also hard to define those workflows. People are, busy and they have day-to-day jobs. So going back and
exactly. Yes.
Sometimes
and the more manual to it, it gets, like you said, I was going to say, if more manual, it either gets forgotten or people, miss it, in that way, so it's great that you'll have it automated. I do want to make a point too, to your automation. One of the great things about having everything in some sort of library like that is it makes it easy to go through multiple types of audits. So you could do your SOC 2. A lot of those controls might also leverage to a FedRAMP or a CMMC or GovRAMP, whatever other controls you might be going to if they're doing HIPAA. Same thing. A lot of the controls do overlap. So if you're able to have everything in one place, it's just a matter of mapping those to the appropriate standards and using that same evidence for multiple audits.
Yeah, and the key there, correct me if I'm wrong, right, Lori, is going to somebody like you that has the experience to know what kind of policies, procedures, questions, et cetera, you need to track. And then using a tool to be able to automate that process. So that way it makes it easier moving forward.
Yes.
And yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, that seems like a win-win combination for making this a success.
Yes.
Truthfully, I think that's like the thing that holds a lot of people back from jumping in, is they feel like the investment up front is so much and there's not a guarantee that, it's going to work out. So having that plan up front and having, that in place at least increases the ability that they'll be successful. And measurably, I mean, like when you take on a new client or you take on somebody, and like, what are some of the things that you look for inside of their business or inside of the product that they offer to say, hey, like, you're either ready or you're not ready to make this jump?
Sure. We typically we start with policies, procedures, honestly, because those are required by any of the standards that you're looking at. And so we always ask, do you have policies and procedures? And then we talk about the infrastructure. Is it in the cloud? Is it physical? And then that kind of leads us down kind of the next, sort of questions, because we want to know what the boundary is. What's the scope of the assessment or the scope of the product that you're trying to sell? We ask that because a lot of customers have a separate product that they're selling to the government than they are selling to commercial, because getting into the government, like we talked about, it's so strict and it's very expensive to build that environment. So people have a separate a commercial that doesn't have all the strict controls. So we talk about that. We talk about access controls, obviously. How are people getting access to it? What other products are they using within the systems, et cetera? So it's really just a deep dive of what they have, what they don't have in place, talk about encryption, just some of those basic things. And then we kind of scope it out to say, hey, does this meet the requirements of whatever standard we're going to? And then we can kind of help them identify where the gaps might be just on that interview and say, hey, let's fix these things. And then if you fix these things, you might be ready, or, this might take a little bit more time.
It's interesting. I think going back to one part you talked about was policies and procedures. And I've heard a lot of people, they just kind of, they're not inside of the space. They're not working on these government contracts. And they're like, yeah, we have policies and procedures, right? Because somebody went through and did their HR training. But when you're talking about the policies and procedures and the work that you do to help people out, we're talking about a lot more than just, do you have a sexual harassment policy? Do you have a clean desk policy? Do you have a policy about, how much time to take off of work and how to ask for PTO? These are really policies and then standard operating procedures or operating procedures that are implemented in the day-to-day governance and operation of the business, right? And so what's the best way that you end up, well, I guess first off, do you end up running into those scenarios where somebody's like, oh yeah, no, we've got policies and procedures, right? And
All
then,
the time.
yeah. And then what do you tell them when you're like, okay, yes, that's a good start, but we have a lot of work to do?
Pretty much. Yeah. Like you hit the nail on the head. We have to take what you have and expand it in order to meet, number one, the requirements, but I also try to remind them how important it is to have these standard operating procedures. A lot of these small to medium-sized businesses might only have one or two IT people or one or two security people. So it's really important that they document what those people are doing in case, that person is out one day or they suddenly quit or something happens and that person's not there anymore. Especially when you're dealing with compliance, because you don't want that next person to come in and start doing something that's not going to be compliant. Because again, that's going to be a red flag. That's going to cause an issue during your audit. And I always tell people too, one of the biggest issues, unfortunately, with like breaches and stuff is with internal people. And sometimes it's just because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing in a right manner. And if you have that training and if you have the right policies and procedures documented and they know where they are and they're followed, you're going to lessen some of those insider issues that happen unintentionally.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to some of the challenges I've gone through myself, and I'm wishing that I had started with somebody like you to help guide me through the process. There's so many times I remember, having real requirements with regulatory obligations that not only are obligations to your point that you need to have in order to be able to win certain types of business, but then also it comes down to, these are effective ways to operate the business and to provide continuity when people are out or when they transition. But yeah, it was a little bit of a flashback to the points in time where I remember sitting there thinking, oh my God, there's got to be somebody who knows this better than, this book that I'm looking at or this website that I'm trying to understand, somebody I can ask questions of, get some guidance and feedback from. And I've got to imagine that when folks do reach out to you early and they start working with you to implement these, that, they're getting a much better process than the one that I went through, where you're just kind of blindly trying to figure it all out.
Thank you. We hope so.
Yeah. So I'm going to actually, I think just for a second here, I'm going to break away from a normal format and ask you to, just in a brief, give people the best way to reach out to you and when to reach out and any other information that can help them understand, because I think this isn't about advertising your business right now. This is really about when somebody's in the weeds and they're trying to figure this stuff out, having a critical resource is something that changes the results. So yeah, what do you suggest they do in order to contact you or someone like yourself, in order to not have to have that very, very trying, difficult experience of learning by not getting it right and then having to do it over?
No, I appreciate that. The best way to contact me is you can email me directly, Lori.Crooks at Cadra.com. It's CADRA.com. You can also go to my website, again, Cadra.com. There's a lot of great information on there. Like I said, we try to post blogs at least weekly, if not more. And then you can find me on LinkedIn too, under either Cadra or just Lori Crooks. I post a lot out there, usually 4 times a week, of different information, trying to continue just with the education of what these frameworks are, what the changes are in the industry. So those are kind of the top 3 ways people can get a hold of me. Like I said earlier, the best time is anytime, but the earlier the better. It's easier to start with a compliance mindset going into the whole process versus getting into the process halfway or 3/4 of the way and then realizing, oh, we need to do XYZ. Especially because, as we talked earlier, a lot of these different controls have to be done on a regular basis. And if they're not being done, that's going to push your audit out even further. And so if you know that early, then we can kind of start setting those up sooner rather than later. And you have that information in the time and the manner that you need it to perform the audit. And we typically find people who go through either us or somebody else to get them ready have an easier time getting through the audit. I work with a lot of third-party organizations, and it's easier for them knowing that someone like myself has helped the client through the entire process because they trust the information and the documentation a lot more than if the client wrote it themselves. They're not quite sure what they're going to get, so they're going to scrutinize it a little bit more. Honestly, that's our passion, is to help these organizations. I could be out there doing, whatever, but I really am passionate about helping organizations through this process because I know how tough it is. I've been on the other side. I've been audited multiple times with large corporations, and that's why I'm on this side of it, just trying to help people, because I feel like there is a need, especially in this governmental industry, because as we talked about, the acronyms are insane. The workload is not light. It's very hard. And we're just here to help people at the end of the day.
It sounds so daunting. What's the ultimate reward in this? I mean, like I've ended up on flights where I've talked to folks that live near San Antonio. So I fly out of an area that has a lot of folks that are doing work for the federal government. And I've had points in time where people are like, I provide toilet paper. Like that's what my business does, right? We don't make it, we source it, and then we make sure it gets in the right place at the right time. And then I've had, all the way through to places where you're talking to folks that are, working on micronuclear reactors to power Army data centers, right? So there's a vast array, and I've got to imagine there's a lot of different size opportunities. When people are trying to understand, like, what is it that I get for putting in all this work, for engaging someone like yourself, for going through all these different operating tasks? Where do you see that the financial reward for their business ends up being?
It's tough to say. I always say compliance, unfortunately, is not a cost center. But if you have compliance done and is done correctly and it meets the right standards, you're not only going to win more business because people will trust the product because it's gone through that third-party audit. It's listed on the FedRAMP marketplace. That means it's been validated. But also, we're hoping by putting all of this in place, you're reducing your risk of breaches, business continuity issues, insider threat issues, like we talked about. Not only is it going to be a financial gain for working with the governmental agencies, but it's lowering your risk for some of those other things that could happen if it wasn't in place, which is hard to justify from a cost perspective. But when you see like the average cost of a breach, like that puts things in perspective, knowing as part of this, you have to have an incident response plan. You have to have all these controls in place to help you through that.
That's really, it's really helpful. I think so. As much as anything else, it's, by taking all these steps, you're really talking about a way to run your business in a more efficient manner. You're talking about a way to mitigate against different types of risks and threats. And then you're creating resilience, right, with the capability to respond because you're thinking through all of the different types of issues that can arise and how you might respond to them.
Correct. Yeah, it's a huge benefit. I don't think a lot of people realize it's definitely more than just selling to the government. It's protecting your organization protecting the data of your customers. If a breach does happen, public image is a huge thing, and you could lose customers as part of it. So like I said, it really comes down to kind of some of that risk reduction as well, and figuring out where that is as part of it. And I feel like it gives people a little bit more peace of mind too, especially within the organization, saying, hey, we've gone through this. Again, just because you've gone through it once doesn't mean that, it's always going to be correct, because you have to do that continuous monitoring. But it means that you have good controls in place. They're solid. They've been vetted. And now you just need to keep them up, which is the easier part than actually putting them in place.
It's easier maybe to get it to that point. I guess the other question I've had people bringing up lately is how much should they expect that the standards are going to change over time? So just kind of dialing into, what AI is doing to impact some, there's not as many AI standards out there that are independent today, right? There's an ISO standard for it, starting to see a little bit more, but the amount of adoption of AI that's occurring seems to be speeding past the number of compliance standards that are coming out, that are guiding people on what to do. Are you seeing that there's likely to be a significant number of changes in a lot of the different compliance standards that are out there to address the ever-changing environment that AI is presenting us with as we wake up each day?
Yes and no. As we all know, the problem with government is things move very slowly. So being able to modify a big standard like a NIST 853, it takes years. They're only on revision 5 and the standard's been around for, I don't even know, 20, 30 years now. So some of the bigger standards, they're not going to change as quickly as, unfortunately, the environment and technology is. But there are slowly more standards. NIST has a AI risk management framework out there. And I saw recently that the DoD is also trying to implement some AI controls within their latest CMMC kind of framework. So they're adding different controls. So what we might see, and again, I'm not an authority on this, but what we might see is more of the federal agencies requiring it themselves outside of the actual frameworks until the frameworks catch up. And even then it's going to be a little time. And then it's usually once a framework's done, they'll draft it and then they have to open for public comment. And then, it takes a while. So 853 Rev 6 is probably, at least another year or two away from being published, which might include AI. And then unfortunately, by the time it comes out, AI might have changed again. Yeah.
So we can see that the standards themselves are not likely to change all that quickly, but there might be additional flow down requirements that will come in the contracts themselves, trying to address some of the different risks or requirements that the government or others see are necessary in order to provide services.
Yes, agreed. And that's what I'm thinking. Like I said, with DoD, they're kind of doing that. GSA, they have their own kind of framework as well. So it's probably going to be flowed down, like you said, either through contracts or through these different agencies.
Bryan, I'll pass it over to you again.
Yeah. My last question, Lori, is you've been doing this for 10 years. A lot has changed. What do you think is going to change over the next 5 years? Or maybe that's too long. What do you think is going to change over the
I was going to say 5 years, it's tough.
5 years is right. We might be at a Mars at that point.
Yeah, exactly. No, AI is going to change a lot. It's good and bad from a cybersecurity and compliance perspective, because we're able to, on the good side, we're able to detect a lot more of the kind of those threats. We're able to kind of look at them a little bit more, analyze them, kind of figure out where the threats are quicker. Opposite side of that is also the bad actors, the hackers are also using AI to attack. So it's going to be changing just kind of that perspective. But I also think from a compliance standard, a lot of the tools that we're going to use, they're going to start using more of the AI to analyze that evidence and help write those policies and procedures. So it means my job is going to pivot a lot, I think, within the next couple of years as well. And so that's really, with Cadra, we're kind of figuring out ourselves as like, hey, how do we pivot with the changing environment and what AI is going to be doing in the future around compliance? So I think there's a lot of change to come. And it's just a matter of finding our way through it and finding the next best place to land and figure out how we can help our customers through the process as well.
Great answer.
It is a great answer. I love it. I've got one final one for you on my side. If you were going to, if let's say that you're going to give your best advice to a new company that is thinking about like, should I go down this path, right? So, going to sell a product, we're going to have it to where it's subject to different types of compliance requirements either way. Should we be thinking about, adding in the government as an additional pathway with all of the work? When the company's still at an early stage, small level with not that many resources, what's your best guidance at that point when somebody's at that point where they're kind of the split in the road or the fork in the road where they can decide to add this additional set of what seems like it's very complex and challenging aspects of operating the business. But then there's so many things that you mentioned that are secondary benefits that come from doing it as well. How do you guide folks like that?
I say no matter what, you should have some sort of compliance security framework for the organization. Like I said, NIST has some great baseline ones. And if you start there, those actually translate very nicely to some of the larger ones. But you want to make sure your basic cybersecurity controls are in place. You want to make sure access control is in place. You want to make sure things are encrypted properly. As long as you're starting to protect the data when you're building that organization, that's really going to help you down the line, whether you go for a governmental contract or not, because it's going to keep your customers' data secure one way or the other. And I'm happy to talk to customers a little bit more too, as they're kind of maybe at that path and trying to decide, where they want to go. But long term, you need cybersecurity, you need compliance, no matter what you're doing, because it is going to protect your data. It's going to protect your customers' data. It's going to protect your information. And it's hopefully going to lower the risk of some of the things that we had talked about, no matter what path they choose.
We usually end with one part, which is just you being able to, kind of throw any piece of information that you want to share with, folks that would be, watching this. So it's a free one for you to share any advice, guidance, ideas, pitch, whatever you want to do.
Man, that's tough. That's probably the toughest question I've had all day. Leave it wide open for me. Now you're putting me on the spot.
Well, the best one is probably to remind people where to find you again, because I'm sure now they're even more likely to do that.
Perfect. Thank you. They could find me at cadra.com, cadra.com, or LinkedIn, Lori Crooks, and or, cadra.com. They kind of post similar right now. Or like I said, you can email me directly if you have questions. I'm happy to get on the phone with anybody too. If you email me, there's a link in my signature that has time to book with me to go through any questions that you might have. Again, I love talking to people, I love helping people. So that's really why I started this business and why we're looking to, help others in the space. Because as we see it, it's not easy. It's complicated. So
and that's why it was a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Lori Crooks, CEO, an entrepreneur, incredible business with Cadra, right? If you're in the space where you need somebody to help advise you on cybersecurity compliance, on government contracting, how to get into that process, definitely look to Lori and her team. It's a very, 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 very difficult process to do on your own. Speak from firsthand experience. Don't recommend it. Do recommend working with an expert like Lori and her team at Cadra. So thanks all so much.
Thanks, Perry. Thanks, Bryan.
Thanks, Lori.